All right, welcome everyone to Bear Smart Durango Online Speaker Series 2025. We are joined today by Jamin Grigg with Colorado Parks and Wildlife, and he'll be speaking about the status of our area bears and efforts to reduce human-bear conflict. We want to do a shout out to the Durango Herald. Thank you for sponsoring this event. And of course, if you get something out of this free event, Bear Smart Durango is a small nonprofit and would certainly appreciate your donations. So thank you so much, and thanks for being with us across the Southwest region and all across the nation. We just got one more event next week, August 5th, so please register for that. And without further ado, I will allow Jamin to go ahead and introduce himself and take it away with the presentation, and then Brian Peterson from BearSmart will be facilitating the Q&A afterwards. So feel free to put all your questions in the chat. We'll have a lively Q&A, and John Livingston from CPW will also be sharing some updates on our area bears. So I'll hand it over to you, Jamin. Thanks so much.
Awesome. Thank you, Sandia. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Bear Smart, for having us this evening. And thank you all for tuning in and spending part of your evening with us. I appreciate you being here. Sandia, is that screen share working?
Yep, you got it. You're good.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you. Well, thanks again, everybody, for being here. I'm Jamin Grigg. I'm a senior wildlife biologist for Colorado Parks and Wildlife, based out of the Southwest Region office in Durango. Just to give a brief introduction about my background, I actually grew up in Durango. I'm a Durango native. My parents both went to Fort Lewis College back in the 1970s and basically have been around the area ever since. So I grew up in the 80s and 90s in Durango, graduated from Durango High School, and then ended up leaving for college, spent about 20 years away, spent some time in Idaho and Montana, got a master's degree up in Montana studying wolves and elk up in the Yellowstone area. Before coming back to Colorado, and then spent about 14 years as an area wildlife biologist for Colorado Parks and Wildlife, first in Craig and then in Salida, and then was fortunate enough about 4 years ago to have a chance to move back to the Durango area as the senior wildlife biologist for the Southwest region. And the Southwest region, essentially, in my position, I supervise our area biologists out of the Durango office, the Montrose office, the Gunnison office, and the San Luis Valley office. So we generally have about 2 biologists out of each of those area offices. And I kind of run the wildlife biology program across the region and supervise them. So that's kind of my background. Really glad to be here this evening. Also really glad to be joined by John Livingston, who's our public information officer here locally and across the region. And John, maybe if you just want to introduce yourself real quick.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, welcome everybody. It's great to see great participation on this meeting. You know, as a public information officer, I think for a lot of folks kind of assume that role is mostly speaking with the media, and that is definitely part of the job. But my favorite part of the job is just getting to talk with members of our public and be involved in our communities and chat with folks about issues that are important to them. Certainly here in La Plata County and across Colorado and the Western Slope, bears and black bear issues are a large part of what we talk about. You know, maybe pre-wolf reintroduction, I would tell people that maybe black bear issues and human bear conflict was probably more than 75% of what I do working here at Colorado Parks and Wildlife. But really like to emphasize that human bear conflict and bear issues look different community by community, and I've really spent a lot of the last 4 years that I've been at Colorado Parks and Wildlife, since I jumped over from being a journalist at the Durango Herald, one of tonight's sponsors. Really just getting to know what those issues look like, what's important to individual communities, what do all the different cities city and county code and ordinances look like in one town versus another, and working with various groups, and of course with Brian here at Bear Smart Durango. So always appreciate the partnership and an opportunity to speak to a group like this, and yeah, really just continue to learn as much from the community as whatever information I can provide. So just thankful for the opportunity tonight. Thank you.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, John. Yeah, appreciate that. And so, yeah, I just really, again, appreciate all of you being here this evening. Thanks for taking some time on a summer evening to join us and talk about bears and talk about local wildlife issues. I assume if you're tuning in to this presentation, it's because you care about bears and you care about wildlife, and I just really appreciate that. So thank you for being here. And yeah, we'll just talk a little bit about local bear management, how we monitor bears across the state, bear populations, how we estimate bear populations, some management of bears across the state. And before we begin, I would just encourage folks, if you're interested in more information or a little bit deeper dive, please feel free to check out either one of these websites or both of these websites. The first one is the CPW website on bear biology and bear management, bear conservation, and then the bottom one is obviously the Bear Smart Durango website. So please check those out if you're interested. Okay, real quick, as we get started here, quick question. What would bears be without bees? Ears? What do you call a polar bear in Florida? A solar bear? And lastly, what do you call a bear stuck out in the rain? A grizzly bear. Okay, sorry about that. Now that we're all warmed up and ready to go, we're going to dive into the hard science here. So, just kidding. We're not going to get that deep into it, but we are going to talk a little bit about some of the science behind bear management in Colorado, and how we monitor and estimate bear populations, and some of the local management here in the Durango area. So most of the high quality bear habitat obviously exists west of I-25 in Colorado, primarily on the western slope of Colorado. The Durango area has some of the best bear habitat anywhere in the state. And for management purposes, CPW breaks out our bear populations largely by drainages or watersheds, sometimes combining multiple watersheds, so that we can kind of get those into a manageable bear management area. We can put together bear management plans, harvest management plans, get population estimates, and so on and so forth. So across the state, and especially the western half of the state, we have these watersheds broken up into different geographic areas that we manage bears by. And so tonight, here in the Durango area, we'll be focusing in on the B6 and B18 populations. These are what we consider the B6 population is basically west of the Animas River. It's essentially the western half of the Animas watershed, and then the Dolores watershed, running west to Utah and then south to the New Mexico state line. And then the B18 bear population is essentially what we call the San Juan bear population, east of the Animas River, and then running south to the New Mexico state line, basically the San Juan Basin or Piedra watershed area. One of the questions we get all the time is how many bears do we have in the state, and how do we know how many bears we have in the state? And the short answers are essentially we currently estimate we have about 17 to 20,000 bears statewide. Those are obviously all black bears at this point. Historically, Colorado certainly would have had grizzly bear populations, but the last known grizzly bear in Colorado was killed in 1979, and we haven't had a confirmed case of a grizzly bear in the state since then. So currently all of the bears in the state are black bears, about 17 to 20,000 statewide. For comparison, we have about 4,000 mountain lions. So pretty significant black bear population across the state. And again, most of that is on the west slope, and certainly good densities here in the southwest corner. We use a variety of indexes to monitor bear populations. We're generally not looking at one or two indices. We're generally trying to look at a trend of a various number of indices over time to get an idea of bear population status and bear population trends, whether bear populations are increasing or decreasing. So we have population models, we have habitat models that I'll talk a little bit about. We can then measure densities of bears across various types of habitat, and then we can use a population extrapolation, basically taking bear densities for certain types of habitat, multiplying that by the amount of that habitat that we have in a given geographic area or across the state to come up with a population estimation or a population extraction. We collect ages of bears based on teeth that are collected during mandatory hunter harvest to get an indication of the age structure of bears that are harvested by hunters. There's a lot of social metrics that go into bear management, obviously, in Colorado. Tolerance of bears is an extremely important part of that. Bear conflicts are a portion of that. So there's a lot of social metrics and human behavior that go into bear management. Hunter harvest, we'll talk a little bit about that, and the mandatory hunter reporting, the mandatory checks that take place for each bear that's harvested by a hunter, and the data that we collect on that. And then all of this goes into the monitoring and management guidelines that are in our bear management plans for each of our populations. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. So essentially, I'm not going to get real deep into most of these indices or metrics, but if you are interested in a deeper dive into them, I would encourage you to read our management plans. They get very detailed and go into a pretty deep dive as far as how we estimate all of these things. But I'm just going to kind of go over more of a 30,000-foot view of it, give some idea of all of the data that we do collect and all of the different indices that we as a state wildlife management agency are constantly monitoring related to bear populations. Okay, so I briefly mentioned the habitat models. Essentially, the habitat models just describe the different types of habitat that we have across the state. They enumerate the types of habitat that we have across the state. And then we're able to collect densities for each of those habitats and get a good idea of areas that we would consider primary bear habitat versus secondary bear habitat versus more of an edge habitat versus an area that's really not bear habitat at all. We can then truth those habitat models, or what we call the resource selection function models that we build using those habitat types. We can truth those using GPS radio collar data from collared bears, as well as bear mortality locations, whether that's hunter harvest, road kills, control kills for bears that are getting into trouble, whatever the case may be. It would make sense that bears are going to be harvested or be killed in areas that are high quality bear habitat, and so we can kind of use that as a truth for our models. And then I mentioned the density habitat, the density estimates that we're able to collect on bears. Essentially, the way we set this up, and this goes back decades and decades, that bear researchers and biologists have been doing this, but we've done quite a lot of this across the state over the last number of decades, where essentially you just string a strand of barbed wire around some trees or stumps with a scent lure in the center, or a couple of scent lures in the center. Those scent lures draw the bears in. They essentially cross this barbed wire to get to the scent. There's no food associated with the lures, so there's no reward for the bears, and thus no habituation. But they just come to check it out. They don't get a reward, but they come to check it out. They catch some hair on the barbed wire, and then we can then use that hair for a genetic analysis to get a density estimate for a certain type of habitat. And then we can, if we do this in enough different habitats over enough different time periods across the state, then we can extrapolate those density estimates for a bear population estimate, whether that's across the state or for a given geographic area, given watershed, or whatever geographic area we might be interested in. So as I mentioned, we've conducted these density studies, these bear hair snag studies in a number of different areas around the state over time. A couple of those have taken place here locally in the Durango area. We had a study area right here around Durango, as well as one in the Piedra drainage. And this is kind of a busy slide, but the point is just to show bear densities in various geographic areas across the state. You can see some of our lower density areas tend to be more of the lodgepole pine type of habitats, the more coniferous forested areas, and then places like the Uncompahgre Plateau or let's see. Why did that freeze up? Oh, there we go. Okay, sorry. Okay, sorry. I don't know why my computer froze there for a second. So places like the Uncompahgre Plateau or here in the Durango, Piedra area, Pagosa area, we tend to have a lot of oak brush dominated systems that produce acorns, very high quality bear habitats. We have a lot of choke cherries, a lot of rose hips, a lot of really high quality bear food. And so we tend to see very high densities of bears in this area. Just for folks' reference, bears per 100 square kilometers, that comes out to, that's about 100 square kilometers is about the same as 40 square miles, just for reference. And then these would be independent bears, so these would not be including cubs. These would be essentially adult bears. So in some of our real high quality bear habitats across the state, you're looking at, we've got almost basically a bear per square mile, which is really a lot of bears. Some of the highest black bear densities probably anywhere in at least the lower 48 states. So the point there just being, again, that a lot of really high quality bear habitat here. Cindy, is my slideshow frozen again?
We're seeing the density estimate slide right now.
Yeah.
I don't
know why it's not advancing.
Well, we can switch over to my slides and you can just tell me to go to the next slide if you like.
Yeah, that'd be fine. Sure. I don't know why mine isn't advancing.
That's okay. That's why we have backups.
Yeah, sorry about that. I'm not sure why my computer's doing that.
Okay, feel free just to tell me when you want to go to the next slide.
Okay. Okay, great. Yeah, thanks for pulling that up. Okay, so then as I mentioned, we not to get too far into the math or the equations related to all of this, but we can take those densities for various habitat types, then multiply them by the amount of that habitat on the landscape, and that can then be extrapolated for a population estimate. We then can use a hunter harvest and overall mortality rate, a threshold, to get an idea of, we essentially are able to know what mortality rate we can have on the landscape and within the population for an increasing bear population, stable bear population, or a decreasing population. And so just for reference, the mortality rates on bear populations here locally tend to run somewhere probably around 7 to 10%. So occasionally maybe getting slightly above 10%, but generally our harvest management is generally not decreasing bear populations here locally. It may be stabilizing bear populations, but probably not decreasing them. We'll talk a little bit more about that here. Go ahead, Cynthia. Okay, great, thanks. So I mentioned the mandatory hunter harvest checks that we have, and talk a little bit about the data that we collect from those. So obviously annually CPW issues a number of bear hunting licenses locally and across the state. Any bear that's harvested by a hunter has a mandatory check associated with that, where the hunter brings the bear into one of our offices, and we pull a tooth from that bear, and we're able to measure the age of that bear based on from the tooth, basically taking a cross section of a tooth. Those teeth have rings, just like a tree does. You essentially can count the rings and get an age of the bear that way, and then we measure whether or not the bear has lactated. So essentially, for females, is this a bear that has ever bred and given birth and essentially had cubs and nursed cubs? So from this, we get an age and sex structure of the bear population that's being harvested annually by hunters. Go ahead, Sandhya. And I don't want to get real deep into the individual percentages that indicate population growth versus population decline. But essentially, you can use these data to get an indication of whether bear populations are growing, declining, and a lot of that is based on just the age and gender composition of your hunter harvest. And I guess kind of the take home of it is that if a lot of your hunter harvest is composed of males, that's indicative of a population that is growing. And go ahead, Cynthia. And if a lot of your hunter harvest is composed of females, especially if you're starting to get into adult females, that's indicative of a population that is declining. So just again, another indices that we can use, another index that we can use to get an idea of what populations are doing. Hunters tend to select for male bears for a couple different reasons. One is just primarily that male bears tend to have larger home ranges than females. They tend to wander a lot more. They're more visible on the landscape. And because they're moving more and have a larger home range, they're just simply encountered more often by hunters. Hunters are also selecting for males simply because most hunters would rather kill a male, are not necessarily looking for females. It's illegal to kill females with cubs. So hunters are primarily selecting for males and are going to harvest a male if they likely harvest a male if they encounter one. So if you're starting to get high percentages of females in your hunter harvest, again, it's just that a lot of the male bears have already been harvested or otherwise killed, otherwise have died, and you're starting to get into that female or breeding population. Go ahead, Cynthia. Okay. Again, no reason to memorize these percentages. These are all in our management plans. If you're interested, but essentially, the take home is if you start to get over 40 or 50% of your hunter harvest being females, especially adult females, it's indicative that you're likely contributing to a population decline via hunter harvest. Go ahead, Cynthia. So just presenting a lot of this to kind of give folks an idea of all of the data that we collect and all of the different science that kind of goes into bear population management, the different indices that we're monitoring on an annual basis. Another thing that we look at annually is mass production, essentially natural food production across the landscape. So every year, about this time of year actually, or here over the next couple months, our district wildlife managers, who are our game wardens, and our local biologists are going to be out on the landscape recording natural food production across the landscape, whether that's Gamble's oak, juniper berries, choke cherries, service berries, rose hips, all of the different natural food sources, acorns coming from oaks, all of the natural food sources that bears would have on the landscape. We'll go out, do these measurements across the landscape. Go ahead, Cynthia. And then get an indication of fall forage conditions geographically. So we do this across all of Colorado. This is obviously just a graph of natural bear forage conditions here in the southwest part of the state for the last 20 years, essentially. And you can see how that kind of bounces up and down over time. 5 obviously is the average on a 0 to 10 scale. In general, we tend to have above average natural bear forage conditions here in the southwest part of the state, primarily again because of our oak brush and all of the acorn production. But we tend to be above the state average, a lot of good bear habitat, but on poor bear forage years, which correspond heavily with drought. So a lot of this is based really on annual precipitation and drought. We'll get these declines. And by all indications so far, I expect 2025 to be a below average year. We had a really pretty dismal winter, not much snowpack. We have had some rain up high, but not much rain at all down lower, and overall just pretty poor precip conditions for this year. So I expect 2025 to be a below average natural bear forage year, and as such we tend to see a lot of human bear conflicts in those years where bears are looking for alternative food sources and they're getting into people's trash and dumpsters and bird feeders and everything else. So go ahead, Cynthia. Okay, so that's just to give an indication again of all of the data that we collect across the state, all of the information that goes into our bear management, just kind of the data and science behind it and how we monitor bear populations. And then we'll dive into some of the specifics here locally with the B6 and B18 bear populations. Go ahead, Cynthia. So again, B6 is the Dolores Hermosa bear herd, basically west and north from Durango. You can see most of the quality bear habitat is up in the northeast quadrant of the geographic area. Again, north and west from Durango, there a lot of really high quality bear habitat. Again, if you're interested in diving into the weeds or getting a broader overview of this population, you can go on our website and read the bear management plan for this population. But essentially, we estimate we have about 1,200 to 1,700 independent bears. So again, not including cubs, essentially adult bears in this population. Go ahead, Cynthia. Thanks. And I mentioned these different harvest composition metrics that we evaluate on an annual basis. Yeah, sorry, I don't know why that's showing up there, but all of these different harvest metrics that we evaluate on an annual basis. Go ahead, Cynthia. And you can see that, generally, again, this is just one of the indices that we're evaluating annually, but based on the sex and age composition of hunter harvested animals, most of the indications are that this is currently a fairly stable bear population. I think that bear populations statewide, and certainly here in the southwest corner as well, are probably in general probably higher than they've ever been in our lifetimes. There was a much lower social tolerance of bears for a long period of time. Bears were killed off similar to wolves and other predator species for a long period of time. Those populations have slowly rebounded over time and are probably generally higher now than they've ever been within our lifetimes. We also have an increasing human population, which we'll talk about, and so we have high potential for a lot of conflicts on the landscape. But in general, this is currently likely a fairly stable bear population, although bear populations, again, will fluctuate based on annual precipitation. Go ahead, Cynthia. And then the B18 bear population, which again is the San Juan bear population east of Durango, heading towards Pagosa, basically the San Juan watershed. A very similar population estimate, 12 to 1,700 bears, probably fluctuating within that range annually in the population. Feel free to head to our website to check out the management plan if you'd like to get a deeper look into it. Go ahead, Cynthia. And then again, the same harvest matrix that you saw with the previous population. Go ahead, Cynthia. And most of the indicators for this population, again, are fairly stable. We are starting to get a little high on adult females in our hunter harvest, which could be an indicator of a slightly declining population. It's something we certainly watch on an annual basis, and we'll adjust hunting licenses accordingly. But again, this is just one of the indices that we're evaluating. Again, we only hunters only harvest between 5 and 10% of bears in this population annually, which should be indicative of a generally, or should allow a population to increase, but a little bit of concern on the level of female harvest within this population. So it's certainly something we'll monitor. Go ahead, Cynthia. Okay, and then just one other thing I wanted to get into here real briefly. Some of you on this call may have even been involved with the stakeholder meeting that was held this afternoon, but locally within La Plata County and the Durango area, there's a regional partnership that has been formed called the Southwest Colorado Outdoor Recreation Roundtable. And this is a partnership of a lot of different stakeholders, local stakeholders, whether that's wildlife advocates, recreation advocates, CPW, Forest Service, BLM. They're all getting together as part of one of these regional partnerships. There's a number of these partnerships that have now been developed across the state. I think we have 18 or 19 across the state. And as part of these partnerships, one of the projects that these partnerships are working on is identifying and evaluating wildlife habitat across the state, and then how human impacts, whether that's recreation, development, whatever it is, are impacting wildlife and natural resources within these geographic areas. So we're developing this GIS model that predicts overall wildlife habitat for a bunch of different wildlife species across the geographic area. So I would encourage anyone who's interested to get involved locally with SCORE and with the local regional partnership, or any of you who are tuning in from outside the geographic area. You probably have a regional partnership in your area that you can get involved with. And I would certainly encourage you to do so. But again, just identifying overall wildlife habitat for the greatest number of species across the geographic area. You can see Durango there kind of jumps out as Durango is basically surrounded by really high quality wildlife habitat for a whole lot of species. Certainly bears are one of those species. Bears are are one of the species included in this model. Bear habitat is included in this model. And you can see, Durango and kind of the surrounding area, the Eminence Valley, north of Durango, all pretty high quality wildlife habitat, and thus high for wildlife conflicts, especially as bears move into areas on poor natural food forage years. Go ahead, Cynthia. Okay, and I just threw this slide in here at the end to give folks something to think about, and probably something that most folks, if you're tuning into this call, are aware of. But I think it's a good, just something to think about moving forward. This is obviously just projected population growth in Colorado over the next number of years. I was born in 1980. Within my lifetime, Colorado's human population has essentially doubled from 3 million to 6 million, and is projected to increase to about 8 million people within the state over the next 15 years by 2040. So what does all of this mean for wildlife and for bears? Obviously it means that we're losing, as development increases, we're losing, most of the new development is going into a lot of really high quality wildlife habitats, bear habitats included. Certainly as Durango expands and La Plata County expands, it's moving into a lot of high quality bear habitat. That means not only a loss of natural forage and natural food availability, but increased potential for conflicts, right? As houses go up in what was historically bear habitat. So probably something that everybody on this call is aware of, but it's a good conversation to have with your neighbors, or just as you're an ambassador within your community, talking to folks about wildlife impacts, storing trash properly, storing, whatever it might be that's attracting bears, and just minimizing this potential for conflict as much as possible. So just something to think about, and something for your conversations with your neighbors and within your communities. Go ahead, Cynthia. And then lastly, I just wanted to finish with a slide, kind of put in a plug. I would highly encourage anybody who hasn't seen this film, I would encourage you to go out and take a look at it, go out and see it. Bears of Durango. This is a documentary that was made about Heather Johnson's bear research, which took place over about a 6 or 7 year period, beginning in 2011, where Heather and her team were maintaining a radio colored sample of about 40 bears, GPS radio colored bears, locally here in the Durango area and surrounding area. This is a really wonderful film. Talks about her research, talks about how bears are adapting to the landscape, how they react on poor natural food forage years, what's drawing them into town, and the risks associated with that. So, we essentially, through a lot of Heather's research and other research, we know that bears being drawn to human activity and human food sources, we know that's risky for them. We know their survival rates go down when they come into town, when they're drawn to human food sources. That's for a variety of reasons. Roadkill rates go up. They might have to be handled or euthanized by CPW. They might be illegally shot, whatever the case may be. We know their survival rates tend to go down when they have to come into towns and have to start looking for human food sources to supplement natural forage. So really wonderful film. I'd encourage everybody to see it. You can, if you just do a Google search, Bears of Durango, you'll find it, or you can go to the bearsofdurango.com website. So just a plug to go see that if you haven't. A lot of really good information about bear research that was done here locally by Heather. And And I think that's essentially all I have. Thanks, Sandia, for taking over the PowerPoint presentation there. And I would just, again, encourage folks to check out the CPW and BearSmart websites if you're interested in kind of a deeper dive. You can also email me if you have questions. My email is jamin.grigg@state.co.us. So feel free to email me if you have questions or get a hold of us. And I guess with that, I would just, I guess, first of all, turn it over to John and Brian for anything you guys would like to cover, and then we can open it up to questions. And thanks again, everybody, for being here.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jamin. And Sandia, can you pull up that presentation again?
Yeah, sure. What slide would you like to see?
There was a slide before the section on B18. I was talking about harvest composition. And I was just wondering, Jamin, if you could kind of walk us through that fluctuation between 2022 and 2023 a little bit. What you're seeing there?
Yeah, you bet. Sandia, is this, I think this is B6, maybe?
Yeah, this is
Yeah.
for B6.
Yeah, this is the right one.
Okay, that's the one you wanted, Brian.
Yeah.
Okay, sure. Yeah, Brian, let me know exactly what you're looking for here. But we'll get a fair amount of annual variation in these metrics simply because on an annual level, your population sizes aren't all that high. So generally, that's why we use these 3-year averages, simply because the 3-year average gives you a higher sample size and tends to not bounce around as much as you'll get on an annual basis. But you can see that over the last couple of years, some of those indices have trended a little bit from green towards red. That's certainly something we will watch. But again, those tend to bounce around a fair amount on an annual basis. So we'll evaluate those on a 3-year average, and then we adjust license allocation annually. In general, I will say that bear populations, at least currently, are probably driven primarily by natural food availability, which is driven again primarily by precipitation. So I think we tend to get a lot of annual variation in bear population sizes just based on annual precipitation and the forage conditions that are available annually. I think bear populations will bounce around by as much as 100 animals annually based on that. And that can be related to adult survival, but a lot of that's really related to cub survival and condition of the mothers going into the den in the winter. So, but if you have specific questions there, I can try to answer them. But we do tend to see a fair amount of fluctuation annually just because the sample sizes aren't that high, which is why we use those 3-year averages.
Gotcha. So if you're looking at this, you're going from the adult male 37% down to 18% with an average of 29, and the female harvest going from 28% to 47% with the average of 36. What's that telling you? It's just there's fluctuations in this and that's how it is, or are either of these indicating something?
Well, if those trends continue, so if you were to see several more years where those trends are running into the red, then you're starting to get a pretty good indication of perhaps a declining bear population. I wouldn't be real concerned about it though until those 3-year averages start to trend red, because again, you can get a fair amount of annual fluctuation. But if those trends were to continue, our response would be to reduce licenses. Again, if you go to the overall harvest, just straight percentage of harvest, we tend to harvest about 5 to 10% of bears annually in these populations, which shouldn't be enough to cause a declining trend. So I guess my general feeling would be if there is a declining trend in these populations, it's likely not currently being caused by harvest. It's being caused by natural forage conditions. I think that tends to drive these populations a lot more than the harvest that we're currently applying on these populations. But yeah, certainly if we were to see those trends push towards red for multiple years in a row, we would it would be something that would be concerning to us, and we would respond with a reduction in license numbers.
Okay, thanks, Jamin.
Well, we've got a couple of questions that have come in here on the chat. And for participants, if you have additional questions, feel free to type in the chat for us and we can ask those. Meanwhile, John, is there anything that you would like to share from CPW and your perspective?
Sure. And I don't know, maybe Brian and I could have a little bit of a conversation about it, or happy to take questions as they come up. But anecdotally, can just speak to a little bit of what Jamin's numbers have shown, and Brian pointed out the tougher barriers from 2012 and 2017 reflected in the surveys. We were talking a little bit about before we started, just kind of what we're seeing with food production so far. Unfortunately, I haven't gotten to get into the high country as much as I'd like to this year, but I know the high country is doing a little bit better than some of our lower elevation stuff. And I think what we've really seen the last couple of years too is even when we have had snow up high, the lower elevation stuff has been so dry, and no snowpack to speak of at lower elevation 2 winters in a row now. And it's kind of the same story this year with the rains. Even when I look up to the north or out to the La Platas, and I feel like I see good rain clouds up there, it seems like in town everything's just so dry, and especially on the dry side, everything kind of west of that 550 corridor and Maine of Durango, it seems like everything's just kind of really crispy this year. And we've seen a huge spike in bear calls to the local CPW Durango office in July. That hasn't been uncommon, I would say, with a few elements in recent years. An influx of 4th of July visitors does bring a lot of folks from outside the area who don't necessarily know what it takes to live in bear country. I see calls every year where it's somebody just set a bag of trash from their vacation rental out on their front porch and just didn't realize that there were bears in the area that could get into it, or wildlife issues, or somebody just pops open that screen door and at 2 a.m. They've got a bear walking into their kitchen. That's kind of happened a lot over recent years, especially with the influx and boom of vacation rentals in our mountain communities. Also, we're just not getting the rains that we need this time of year, when the bears are kind of sick of eating on the grasses and everything else, and everything's turning into a crisp, and then the acorns aren't in yet, and the choke cherries aren't coming in yet. They're looking for a better food source. They're looking for more calories, and it's driving a lot of them kind of into more of our residential areas. Again, in some recent years, I feel like we've seen this spike for about 2 weeks around the 4th of July and for a week or two after. And then usually the monsoons come in, things get a little bit better, and the calls start to quiet down. And this year, that's just not happening. Unfortunately, with our local office, pretty much every bear trap that our wildlife officers have to utilize has been out since the 4th of July and just constantly shuffling from one place to the other. And the thing that we continue to struggle with as an agency is the long-standing mindset of, if you call CPW, it's gonna lead to a bear being removed, whether that's relocated or euthanized. And the truth is, it's just not the reality of our agency. And I can't speak to the way things maybe were. In decades ago, or what things look like to get to this point. Our agency as a state takes upwards of 12,000 calls about bears a year, and some of those are just sightings. And we always encourage people to call us with sightings. It helps us with our data collection. Brian and I can maybe speak a little bit about the human bear conflict reduction grant that the state of Colorado has put out in our communities for the last 4 years now, with $1 million worth of funding each year over the last 4 years. And a lot of that has come straight to our communities here in La Plata County. Upwards of $300,000 worth of that funding in the first 3 years has come here to Durango and La Plata County. And even just calling in a sighting to CPW helps us with that data collection. It's a lot easier for somebody who's reviewing a grant request to say, oh, wow, the town of Durango is asking for this much money. Maybe it's a lot bigger ask than some of these other communities. But hey, look, they've taken 682 calls about, bear conflict in their community last year. Clearly, there's a need there, and probably helps grant reviewers reward money to our community because of that. Not only that, but I get a little frustrated in my own neighborhood this year. I've lived in the neighborhood I'm in west of Durango for 3 years now, almost four, and it's been pretty good. Like, I think about a decade ago, everybody kind of got the drill of like, hey, we're going to keep our trash cans inside our garages. We're not going to put them out till the morning of pickup. Hey, let's take those bird feeders down. And this year we had one bear that kept coming into our neighborhood, and people kept posting on the community Facebook page, oh, it's here, and then all of a sudden, about a month after people were posting sightings of this bear's been in my garage, and it's the second time it's been in my garage, and it ransacked my freezer, and it's done this. And the comments were, all right, it's been in your garage twice. It's time to call the professional bear movers. And it's really frustrating for me living in my own community and seeing that and being like, no, the time to call us was maybe the first time it got in your garage, or, the first time you noticed it 4 or 5 nights in a row coming through on your Ring doorbell camera, and you know that it's getting into a neighbor's trash that happens to be a vacation rental property. We would much rather respond and go knock on a door and talk with folks right away about that first incident than to only hear about it after it's been 5 weeks of this bear being spotted on the regular, and now it's been in a garage twice in an occupied home where there's kids involved. Kids go out for ice cream and there's a bear out in their deep freeze eating all the ice cream in the garage. That's not a situation. We just don't want to see conflict get to those levels. And Brian can speak to this too, but we saw another incident where a landowner took a bear east of Durango a couple weeks ago for getting into his chickens, and then he posted something along the lines of, all right, well, guys, this wasn't the time to call the bear after I had to do something about it. The time to call the bear or to call CPW about the bear was the first time it was sniffing around my coop, because then they could have just relocated it. And it's like, we don't want to just be relocating bears either. We know that's a major life disruption for a bear. I think there's a challenge in a lot of our mountain communities, and I'll use Telluride as an example. The community of Mountain Village is a community where largely we don't hear about things until a bear's been in 4 or 5 different homes. We had a bear just a couple weeks ago that was in a room with a 4-year-old, and we didn't hear about it until the next day, until the bear was in the neighbor's house the next day. And that community is more of a just come get this problem bear and get it out of here. Well, then inside the town of Telluride, we had another bear that was inside multiple homes over a course of 4 days, entering an apartment complex multiple times. And there, it's let's form a human barricade to prevent CPW from trapping a bear and having to relocate it, because they value, hey, oh, we know how to live with the bears. We don't need any intervention. Well, if a bear is getting into the same apartment complex 3 or 4 days in a row, clearly there's something wrong and we need to intervene. My point being behind all of this is that there's a lot of different feelings about bears and whether or not you want a trap ever set, and we totally get that, but we want people to understand in La Plata County this year, we've had over 330 calls about bears for either property damage, getting into food sources, aggressive behavior, being in somebody's kitchen. Um, and, like fewer than 1% of those are leading to a bear being relocated or having to be euthanized for any reason. So really just trying to constantly fight the battle of don't call the state agency until you need us to come move a bear. We do have a bear education intern at our local Durango office. She was just out canvassing more neighborhoods, knocking on doors. We get a call that says, and all of a sudden we can line it up with our data that, wow, we've gotten 15 calls in 2 days from that same neighborhood. And we can send our bear education intern, one of our customer service representatives, out knocking on doors saying, hey, you got this bird feeder right here. If you don't want that bear coming onto your porch, let's maybe take that down. Or notice you got a lot of chicken feed just kind of stored outdoors that isn't really secured. Let's maybe consider putting that in a secured shed or something. that's the kind of education we'd rather go out and do. And it is just tough for us as a state wildlife agency when people do only want to call us when they want us to move a bear.
Yeah, very well said, John. Can't really top that. I think the thing that frustrates me a little bit is I think there's a sense of mission accomplished in our area. We've placed a lot of infrastructure on the ground, a lot of bear-resistant trash cans. Most of town is relatively bear-proofed. And I think we thought we were ready for anything. And I think that's one thing that's come out of this bear season is we are still woefully ill-prepared. And there's more to this than placing infrastructure. You have to require that people use bear-proofing measures properly, and current community wildlife ordinances need to be enforced at a level that's meaningful. And I think another thing that's a bit worrisome is when we started as a result of the bad bear season of 2001. That was another drought year with Missionary Ridge Fire. And we started up after that. And these bad bear seasons used to be spread apart by 5 years. It's 2001, 2007, 2012, 2017. And I think with how dry it is and an increasing, warming climate in Colorado, do you guys worry about this being the new norm now? That this is just how it is? Like July is going to be start a bear season and hopefully acorns come on and things mellow out? Or do you see this trending in a good way or a bad way? Are you optimistic about this improving in the future?
Am I optimistic about more rain coming in the future? No, I'm not. Yeah, I think this is probably more of the new normal. It's going to be similar to wildfire seasons. We're going to see more frequent wildfire seasons, higher intensity wildfire seasons. It'll be the same with bears. Bad drought years we know result in poor natural forage conditions for bears. And those are just going to likely become more common. So I think we are expecting poor natural food years to be a more common thing heading into the future.
Yeah, and the weather just seems to be feast or famine these days. You either get a massive winter that rivals some record winters, or you're getting less than 100 inches of snow at Purgatory Resort. It's kind of a crazy scenario. And that I know that comes with some biological swings that maybe Jamie can speak more to, but it seems like we had some good winters, and then we had some good food availability, and then reproduction rates seemed like they were pretty high. And then we'd have a relatively mild winter, and it seemed like cub survival was also really, really high. So then it just seemed like we had a year or two now where it seems like we've got a few more juvenile bears that have just been kind of, moms just kind of kicked them out, and now they're kind of looking for um, a little bit of territory of their own to carve out. And a lot of times it's in kind of more marginal bear habitat where maybe there's not good forage, or it's a little bit closer to our residential areas. And Brian, I know you've posted a lot of pictures of some, what look like just juvenile bears that probably just been, moms just kicked them out, just walking the alleys of West Durango in the middle of the day. And that's kind of tough to see. But biologically, I think with some of that climate change stuff too comes maybe some of these swings in good cub production, and then coupled with survival. But then last year too, we didn't get snow until really into January, and all of a sudden we've got cubs coming out of the den too early that would have gone in and done with mom for the winter. And we were still taking cubs to our Frisco Creek Wildlife Rehab facility that CPW operates out of Del Norte, still all the way through like December 31st of last year. And usually that really is toned down by October, November at the latest. And we were still taking in some of these orphaned cubs way into December.
Yeah, and Jamin mentioned the Bears of Durango film about the study down here. And one thing the study revealed was that if the climate continues to get increasingly warmer in Colorado, that bears will spend less and less time hibernating, which means they'll be out on the landscape longer than they are now, which means more likelihood of human and bear conflict. So we've got a couple questions here. Justin asked, and I think this is for Jamin, how is carrying capacity determined as it relates to predicting or controlling for potential human conflicts and the issuance of hunting licenses?
Yeah, good question, Justin. Carrying capacity is determined largely by our habitat models, and then using that density calculation. So going out and measuring bear densities in certain habitat types, and then using that calculation of density, bear density times habitat type times basically the availability of that habitat or the amount of that habitat within the geographic area, multiplying those and coming up with a carrying capacity essentially that way. So it's just habitat type times bear densities for those habitat types times your geographic area. So that's really your carrying capacity. Now that does fluctuate again. I think carrying capacity for bears fluctuates a lot annually based on annual precipitation, based on how much snow you get in the winter and how much rain you get in the summer, and what kind of natural bear forage year it is. So I think you can get a fluctuation of several hundred bears annually just based on your annual precipitation and your natural food production. But that's essentially how you come up with the carrying capacity. Human conflicts are, really just mostly predicated by human behavior, largely. I mean, certainly bear densities and bear population sizes have something to do with that, but most of that's really predicated on human behavior and accessibility to human food and trash and all of that. Now we do certainly CPW issues hunting licenses. Again, we generally try to maintain a bear harvest, a hunting harvest of like 5 to 10 to 12% of the population annually, which should allow for a stable population, or even will allow for a bear population to increase if habitat carrying capacity allows it to increase. So generally, we're not suppressing bear populations via hunting licenses and bear harvest. I think most of our bear populations are really habitat driven at this point. And again, a lot of that's related to annual precipitation patterns. So we do harvest some bears, but I think really the take home, and Heather showed this very clearly with her research, bear populations will fluctuate substantially based on annual precipitation and what kind of a natural food year you have.
Great, thanks much. Andy asked, is the home range of individual bears usually confined to a particular watershed?
Yes and no. And again, that's also largely driven by what type of a natural bear food year you have. Bears move a lot more in a poor food year. They just simply have to move to find food. They're going to search out areas of better forage. So bear home ranges and bear movements expand greatly on dry years, on poor natural food years. So I would say the answer is it depends. Oftentimes bears will stay within a geographic area and within a watershed, but they're going to increase their movements substantially if they have to find food.
Cool. And we've got a couple last questions I wanted to ask Jamin. You talked about the best bear habitat in the state. I've always heard aspen snowmass is the best surrounding a community. How does Durango stack up statewide?
It's probably right there. Anywhere where you've got a lot of oak brush, a lot of acorns, and a lot of choke cherries, rose hips, you're going to have a lot of bears. And so, aspen snowmass is certainly a high bear density area. The Uncompahgre Plateau, west of Montrose, is a high density bear area. But based on the hair snare snags, the studies that we conducted, the density estimates that we conducted, we have as high of densities of bears as anywhere in the state, right in this area.
Nice. And Laura asks, maybe John can talk about this. I just moved to Durango from Nashville. My neighbors have regularly seen a black bear in our apartment complex, and there have been paw prints in our parking lot. How do you recommend I approach taking my dogs out to relieve themselves at night? Should I not be concerned? Should I carry bear spray? Thanks so much.
Yeah, I'd say the earlier in the night you can take them out, the better. But we've certainly seen incidents happen at any time of day. Bear spray is always a great thing to keep on you, not only for bears but other wildlife species, or even if you ever get in trouble with a human. So certainly could always recommend that. I would also be curious what kind of dumpster maybe is at your apartment complex. Is it being closed properly? If it's a steel wire over it, or if it's a steel bar over it? Want to make sure that yourself and your fellow tenants in that apartment complex are utilizing a bear resistant commercial trash dumpster if you have that available. And if you don't, I would highly encourage you to contact your landlord and make sure they're doing whatever they can do to provide a dumpster that's not attracting bears to your property. There's a good chance that if that bear's frequently visiting that area, they're either accessing your trash or trash at a building next to you.
Yeah, good point, John. The 2 times I've been bluff charged were by bears guarding trash in a dumpster in town. Yeah, there's been studies about bears and dogs, and I think one of our speakers addressed that. And you just have to be super careful with dogs, especially if you're around defensive bears or females with cubs. A lot of people think I have my dog with me, so that'll protect me from bears. But a lot of times the dog will get you in trouble with bears. So
Yeah.
just be.
Yeah, and unfortunately, our last fatality with a black bear attack in the Durango area back in 2021 was an incident with a woman out walking her dogs off leash. It's believed by CPW and the La Plata County Sheriff's Office that the dogs were off leash, probably got in between a sow and her cubs, and led to a really tragic incident here in the Durango area, just north of town. So definitely something to keep in mind. And again, when you're talking about dogs, with all wildlife issues and even for human safety, keeping dogs on leash is always the foremost recommendation.
Cool. And I guess this is for John. Can you talk a bit about the state statutes CPW can use to prevent the feeding of bears?
Sure. So a lot of times CPW is a little bit limited in its ability on issuing knowingly feeding of wildlife tickets. Now, a little bit, this is kind of twofold. Our standard and our statutes is for knowingly feeding wildlife. Obviously, we know that there's a lot of folks that are feeding wildlife, but the officer's burden of proof to prove that that person is knowingly feeding wildlife, requires some sort of evidence, or a neighbor taking photo of them, tossing an apple, or doing something to be feeding that animal, or setting a pizza out on their trash can, which sounds crazy, but I've heard of it, because people sit out and they want to see if a bear is going to come out. We get visitors that visit Colorado who, one of the first things they say is, "Can I see a bear while I'm here?" And unfortunately, we deal with that a little bit in our communities too. So there is currently a movement that we're discussing within CPW, a little bit insider baseball here, of trying to lower our state statute to be able to get people for negligently feeding wildlife, and lessen that from knowingly down to negligently. We also currently have a system where the first time we catch somebody, it's a verbal warning. Second time, it's a written warning. The third time, it's a ticket. Well, what happens the first time when you get a verbal warning? Nobody ever calls us again because they don't want to escalate to a written warning or a ticket. And a lot of times, neighbors don't want to rat out neighbors either and deal with that. So there's also a push right now to alleviate an officer having to give a warning before writing a ticket. Now, officer discretion is always going to be a thing. If it's somebody we're really trying to work with and we think, we can work with this person and educate this person. I think sometimes you do win more fans with that education piece first before you start slapping tickets out. But at the same time, we do know that there are some folks out there that it's like, we've talked to this person every few years about this incident, or a lot of times we have issues with people big game feeding, and a lot of times the tickets you do see from CPW of feeding wildlife end up being somebody that's got hay bales in their garage and they just open up their garage and let the deer come eat it in the winter. And people are willing to just pay that ticket. because they think they're saving the deer over the winter. And the reality is they're probably causing a lot of other problems for those deer beyond that, and contributing to disease spread. But anyway, a few things in motion to try to make it easier for CPW officers to write those tickets in those pretty clear offending situations.
Thanks, John. And Jamin, you had a map of various quality of habitat across the state. Are you seeing bears moving into and utilizing more and more marginal habitat over time, especially with an increase in climate?
That's a really good question. I don't know that I have enough information to answer that. That would be an interesting thing to evaluate and study. I imagine we probably have enough GPS radio collar data on bears across the state at this point, but that's probably something we could evaluate. I think certainly as bears are pushed out of their preferred habitats and as development occurs in preferred habitats for bears, probably what you see is both an increase in bear human conflicts, but then also, bears naturally try to avoid humans and human conflict. And so they probably are oftentimes getting displaced out of those areas, or they're trying to continue to survive in those habitats that are getting developed and end up getting into trouble or killed or whatever. So, but I imagine some bears are probably trying to eke it out in less optimal habitats as they have to.
Thanks much. Sandia, how are we doing on time?
Yeah, I think we should probably start wrapping it up here. Really want to thank you, Jamin and John, for really engaging discussion here. Thanks, Brian, for moderating, and thanks for everyone's great questions. This has been a really informational session, and it's great to learn about our area bears here in the Southwest Colorado region. So thank you, everyone, for being here. We have our final session next week with Justine Valieres on with Montana Fish and Wildlife, and it'll be on the topic of managing bears and reducing conflict in Montana, which will be very applicable to us here locally and across the country. So please register in advance for that session. And Brian's putting in the phone numbers here to call Colorado Parks and Wildlife about any bear issues, or the La Plata County Bear Hotline. So both of those numbers are in the chat. And thank you so much. Great presentation. Have a great night, everyone. Stay safe out there. It's a busy bear season.
Yeah.
Thank you all. Thank you for your interest in Colorado's wildlife, and thanks for having me.
Thanks so much, Jamin and John. That was awesome.
Thank you.